Why don't people born under the sign of Libra go to church anymore? The truth nobody tells you. You think you know why you stopped going to church. Routine, disbelief, the hectic life. But what if that was just the easy version of something you never quite knew how to name? Those born under the scales don't distance themselves from a sacred place because of a lack of faith. They distance themselves because a specific sound, which that space echoed within them since childhood, has stopped finding an answer. And by the end of this video, something within you will make sense in a way it never has before. Because those who have Libra in their astrological chart don't abandon a sacred place out of laziness, nor out of a lack of faith in the common sense of the word. Libra abandons such places for the most silent reason there is. The sound that space emitted within them has stopped finding an echo, and nobody teaches you to notice this, because nobody talks about the real reason. They talk about routine, about modernity, about disillusionment. Nobody talks about internal acoustics. Imagine a tuning fork. By itself, it's just a forked piece of metal, plain, with no apparent function. But place it against the right surface, and suddenly it vibrates, producing a clear, sustained note that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. The childhood of a Libra child within a church, a terreiro, Afro-Brazilian religious space, any space of collective silence, functioned like that. The environment was the surface, the child was the tuning fork. And together the two produced a note that the child never knew how to name, but never forgot. The problem is that nobody tells you that this note doesn't come from the place. It comes from the encounter between you and the place. And encounters, unlike addresses, don't just stand there waiting for you to come back. You grew up. You learned to balance yourself in classrooms, in relationships, in decisions that required you to be the reasonable person, the peacemaker, the one who saw both sides before anyone even asked. Little by little, without realizing it, you became extremely competent at doing alone what a sacred space used to do for you for free, organizing the internal chaos into some form of bearable order. And there lies the first thread that no one pulls. If you've learned to produce that balance on your own, why do you still feel something is missing when you enter a quiet place, even without wanting to return to any specific religion? Why does the physical memory of that note still exist somewhere within you? Perhaps because the balance you've created yourself, all the time, without pause, without anyone sharing the burden, has a cost you've never factored in. A cost that doesn't appear as religious guilt, nor as nostalgia for childhood. It appears as a specific kind of weariness, almost impossible to explain to anyone who isn't a Libra. A weariness of always being your own source of peace. And perhaps it is precisely this weariness that has distanced you from the wooden bench, the stained glass window, the unison chorus. Not because you stopped believing in something greater, but because, at some point, you traded a bell that rang alone, in the distance, calling everyone into that collective balance for a completely different kind of bell. A bell without an automatic clapper, a bell that only rings if someone all the time tirelessly holds the rope and pulls the clapper out, blow after blow, never letting another hand share that weight. Because somewhere you learned that asking for help, weakness, as if admitting that you also need a bell rung by another hand, were admitting that the balance you show to the world is more fragile than it seems. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac. Signed to a Life of Purpose isn't about religion, and it doesn't promise to replace any church pew from your childhood. It talks about something simpler and more difficult, how a Libra can stop constantly manufacturing on their own the balance that others receive for free in some sacred corner. It translates in direct language exactly this mechanism you've just recognized in yourself, the constant search for external harmony and the invisible cost of never letting anyone or anything share that burden with you. If, as you listen to this, something within you recognizes this specific weariness, it's because this story isn't just about Libra in general. It's about you. And recognizing it now, while this discomfort is still fresh, is worth more than recognizing it 6 months from now, when you've already found another way to disguise the same pattern. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And in the meantime, tell me in the comments, where was the last place where you felt that peace that didn't depend on you to hold everything together? And the strangest thing is that nobody treats you like someone who's tired. They treat you like someone balanced, a good person, easy to get along with. Nobody sees the effort behind it because for Libra, effort never appears from the outside. It's like that tuning fork vibrating inside a body that has learned to appear still. People see the calm note that comes out. Nobody sees how much encounter, friction, and adjustment needed to happen inside for that note to come out like that, clean, without stridency, exactly at the right moment in the conversation, the meeting, the tense family dinner. And perhaps that's why spaces of collective silence, like a childhood church, work so well. There, for an hour, no one expected you to be the source of balance. There was a bell, a ritual, an entire structure already in place, taking care of that for you. You just needed to be present, and it was precisely this absence of responsibility and not the presence of faith that your body missed to this day, even without knowing how to name it. There's also a recurring pattern in the friendships and relationships of those who carry this energy, the difficulty in accepting care without immediately giving something back. Someone offers help, and even before properly accepting it, there's already an impulse to balance it with a similar gesture, as if receiving without reciprocating at the same time would leave the scale dangerously tilted to one side. It's a protective mechanism, disguised as kindness. While you're busy reciprocating, you don't have to feel the burden of simply being cared for without doing anything for it. And this mechanism, when examined closely, is the same one that appears in Libra's relationship with sacred spaces. It's difficult to accept that there, within those walls, no one expected anything in return from you. You could simply receive that silence, that song, that colored light without needing to balance anything back. And perhaps it is precisely this gratuitousness, so rare in the adult life of a Libra, that the body still misses, even when the mind has already decided that it no longer needs it. And it's curious to realize that this habit didn't appear overnight. It formed exactly like a callus forms, repetition after repetition, until the skin no longer feels the friction, only that it's normal. You disagree with someone and immediately say, "But I understand both sides." You sense tension in a room and adjust your tone of voice before you even realize you're doing it. Each of these gestures seems small, almost automatic, but it's precisely this automatism that makes you the bell that rings by itself, without stopping, without a break, without anyone taking turns on the rope. And there's a question that almost no Libra allows themselves to ask, because it sounds too ungrateful, too selfish. What if this tiredness you feel has nothing to do with religion, or faith, or God, and everything to do with the simple fact that no one ever taught you to stop ringing your own bell, not even for 5 minutes? There's another recurring theme in the lives of those born under the scales, a kind of aesthetic hunger that isn't vanity, but survival disguised as good taste. A disorganized house is unbearably bothersome. An aggressive conversation produces physical, almost bodily discomfort. An unbalanced friendship, where one person gives much more than the other, becomes unsustainable far too quickly. And the easiest explanation, the one everyone accepts, is you just like harmony. But a love of harmony doesn't explain the silent despair that arises when it disappears. Imagine a perfectly still body of water, reflecting every detail around it with almost impossible clarity. Now throw a small stone into that mirror. The image shatters into waves, and it takes a while to become still again. For most people, this is just water moving. For a Libra, it's the whole world losing its sharpness for a few unbearable seconds. And the question remains, why does your peace have to be so like a body of water? Beautiful, yes, but destroyed by the first stone anyone throws. Perhaps because deep down, this symmetry was never just about aesthetics. Perhaps it's the same symmetry as a church ceiling seen from below when you were 7 years old and looked up without understanding why it seemed so right, so exactly in place. You weren't admiring architecture. You were, without knowing it, admiring the only thing that made sense in the middle of a world that outside those walls seemed too misaligned. It's worth noting that none of this is a weakness of character, much less a spiritual failing. It's simply the price of a protective mechanism that worked too well for too long without ever being reviewed. And such mechanisms, when finally recognized, don't demand blame. They demand adjustment. And there's a scene that almost every Libra recognizes, even without ever having stopped to think about it properly. Someone arguing loudly near you, and your body already reacting before your mind decides anything. Tense shoulders, an almost physical urge to soften the blow, to find a phrase that will lower the temperature in the room. This isn't a conscious choice, it's a reflex. It's the same reflex that made sense within a sacred space, where there was a structure caring for collective harmony, and which you now perform alone in every room you enter, without realizing that you're doing the work that was once shared with an entire ritual, with an entire choir, with hundreds of people holding that same balance together. It's also worth noting another almost invisible detail. Libra is usually the last person to admit to being tired, even among close friends. Not because they want to seem strong, but because admitting to being tired sounds to them like breaking their own silent agreement to keep everything in order. It's easier to smile and continue mediating than to stop and say bluntly, I also need someone to hold this for me right now. There's a simple test that reveals something uncomfortable about those who carry this energy. Be alone, in absolute silence, without your cell phone, without music, without anyone around, for 20 minutes. It's not meditation, it's just pure silence. Notice what your body does. Most Librans feel an almost physical urge to fill that space with something. A thought, a memory, a to-do list, anything but silence itself. And it's not a lack of spirituality. It's the opposite. It's that in true silence, without an audience, without anyone to balance it but yourself, the only sound left is your own. And that sound, unfiltered, without social editing, can be frightening to hear. Imagine a completely empty echo chamber. Any noise you make comes back to you, amplified, with nothing around to absorb or distract it. It is precisely this feeling that makes Libra avoid the silence of an empty temple, of a prayer without an audience, of a moment alone with oneself, without any external harmony to manage. So maybe the question was never, why did you stop going to church? Maybe the real question is, what exactly are you running away from when you avoid being alone with your own thoughts, with no one to balance them but yourself? And there's a curious detail in this silence test. The more organized, the more resolved a Libra's life seems on the outside, the greater the discomfort tends to be in this silence without an audience. Because the more people they've learned to balance out there, the less practice they have in being alone with their own sound, without editing anything, without adjusting the tone for anyone. It's almost ironic. The most harmonious person in the group tends to be, in particular, the one who most fears their own echo. This type of silence, which returns one's own sound unfiltered, is precisely where many people get stuck. And that's exactly where the divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose comes in a different way. not as another demand to be at peace alone, but as a practical guide for those who have never had anyone to teach them how to share this burden. It deals precisely with this blind spot of Libra, the habit of outsourcing one's own balance to people and environments, and shows how to rebuild this capacity from within, without depending on an audience, without depending on perfect silence. The link is in the first pinned comment. After this kind of recognition, it's common to experience a strange feeling, almost a mixture of relief and discomfort, realizing that the problem was never a lack of faith, but an excessive responsibility in maintaining alone a balance that should be shared. And it is precisely at this point that the paradox between astrology and psychology becomes clearer than at any other moment in this story. And this is where astrology meets psychology in a way that's almost too uncomfortable to be comfortable. You haven't lost your faith. You've just stopped needing a fixed address for it. The faith of an adult Libra no longer resides within four walls with a bell outside calling everyone inside at the same time. It has become a daily, silent exercise of recalibration, a clock that needs to set itself right every morning without any church bell marking the correct time for it. And a clock like that, without any external reference, can even function well for years. But there's one question it can never answer on its own. How can it know for sure if the time it's showing is actually the right time, or just the time it decided, without anyone confirming, was correct? This is the discomfort that plagues the life of those born under the scales. It's not doubt about God. It's doubt about whether the balance itself, maintained entirely alone year after year, is still calibrated correctly, or if, at some point, without realizing it, it began to mark a slightly wrong time, and nobody, not even you, noticed. And there's something rarely said about clocks without external reference. They don't err all at once. They err slowly, minute by minute, day after day, until one day the difference is too great to ignore. That's how it usually happens with Libra too. It's not a single crisis. It's an isolated bad day. It's a series of small adjustments that it made itself alone without anyone checking, until one day it realizes it's exhausted in a way it can't quite explain, not even to itself. A clock that is never checked externally tends sooner or later to become out of sync without you realizing it. And it is precisely at this point of recalibration that the divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose differs from any generic self-help advice. It was designed for those born under Libra who need real reference, not just another pretty phrase about balance. It helps identify exactly where your internal clock began to deviate and how to readjust it without depending on another person to validate your every decision. You already possess the genius. You just need to unlock it. Access is in the first comment, but the last few units are disappearing. Click now and start this transformation. It was thinking precisely about this kind of silent exhaustion that stories like The Divine Path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose make sense to so many people who were born under this energy. Not as a promise of a magic solution, but as a reminder that there is another way to maintain balance, a way that doesn't require you to be alone, the bell, the rope, and the hand that pulls everything at the same time, forever. There's a simple scene that perhaps explains all this better than any theory. An old church, one of those with a heavy bell with a long rope, where it takes strength to make the clapper move properly. For a long time, one person alone took care of that bell, pulling the rope at the right time every day without fail, until one day, tired, she let someone else pull the rope for her. And she discovered, to her surprise, that the sound came out the same, perhaps even more beautiful, because it didn't come from someone exhausted trying to keep everything standing alone. This isn't about going back to the wooden bench of childhood, nor about rediscovering a faith that needs a fixed address again. It's about understanding that shared balance is not less a balance. Libra spends its life believing it's responsible for keeping every scale in the world aligned, including those no one asked it to carry. And real maturity begins precisely when it understands that it can, from time to time, let another hand pull the rope without this signifying weakness, loss of faith, or loss of self. The bell will still ring. The question was never whether it will stop ringing. The question was always who is allowed to help ring it, and perhaps the most beautiful, quietest, most peaceful answer is realizing that you never had to carry this entire weight alone. It's just that no one had told you that before.